Now we'll talk about condensation polymer. As the name implies, condensation polymers are formed by performing a condensation reaction. And we've already seen an example of that when we talked about how you can react a carboxylic acid and an alcohol to make an ester. That's going to be a type of reaction that we're going to study more as we go through this section here. When you perform the condensation reaction combining, let's say, a carboxylic acid and an alcohol to make the monomer unit, you form what's called a copolymer. Copolymers are made up of two or more types of molecules, right? So if you were to, for instance, make an ester, it's made up of two types of molecules, right? You make it from a carboxylic acid and an alcohol. Now, if you were to make a polymer by reacting carboxylic acids and alcohols to make esters, you would form what's called a polyester. And so let's take a look at an example of that. Here we're going to react this alcohol with this carboxylic acid. And we know from what we've seen before that you can perform the condensation reaction by eliminating a water molecule. We're just going to draw a box around the OH group from the carboxylic acid and only the hydrogen atom from the alcohol functional group. This represents the water molecule that gets eliminated when you combine these two molecules to make the monomer unit. Let's go ahead and predict what the products are. So we know that water gets eliminated, right? This is the water that gets eliminated in the process. But let's draw what the structure of the monomer will be when you form the ester here. To do that, I'll start by counting the carbons. So I'm just going to label these A and B in the alcohol, 2 carbons in the alcohol. And in the carboxylic acid, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons there. So now let's go ahead and draw our monomer product. We're going to have, from the alcohol side, we have an OH group here, and then here's 1 carbon atom, here's 2 carbon atoms, and then an O. And I'll label those 2 carbon atoms, right? So we called that one B and that one A. We now get to our oxygen atom, right? That's this atom right here. And then this oxygen atom will now be free to bond to this carbon atom, number 1, in the carboxylic acid. So that's going to be our next bond, is to carbon atom number 1 from the carboxylic acid right here. Carbon atom number 1 in the carboxylic acid has a CO double bond, and so I'll have to draw that in now. So a CO double bond coming off like that, and then that carbon atom is attached to carbon atom number 2, 3, 4, and then carbon atom number 4 has another carboxylic acid functional group attached on the end. So I'll just go back and renumber these again. So here's 2, 3, and 4. Right, just so that you can see which atoms are which, and to see that no carbon atoms were accidentally dropped out or added in the process here. Now, importantly, when you make the monomer unit here by performing the condensation reaction, you are eliminating a water molecule. And so atoms are being lost from the starting materials when you go to make your polymer. This distinguishes condensation polymers from addition polymers, because in the case of an addition polymer, no atoms were lost in the process. All you did to elongate the chain was to break a pi bond. But in the case of condensation polymers, you perform a condensation reaction and you have to eliminate, in this case, water, but it could be other small molecules, in order to make the polymer. Now, how would we take this monomer unit and then go ahead to polymerize it? So in order to form the polymer, it's important to notice that this reaction can be propagated by recognizing that we still have an alcohol functional group on the left-hand side of the molecule that has not reacted yet, and we still have a carboxylic acid functional group on the right-hand side of the molecule that has not been reacted yet. And so this frees up this molecule to perform additional condensation reactions with other monomer units. So another one of these monomer molecules can come in, and the OH group from one of them can react with the carboxylic acid group on this side. And in doing so, you would eliminate the OH group from here, and you would eliminate the H atom from the alcohol functional group. And those get eliminated as another water molecule as you go on to elongate the chain. And so if we wanted to identify what the polymer's structure would be, we could put a bracket that starts right here, and then a bracket that goes around here. Now, the reason why this H and this OH are excluded from the brackets, they're excluded from the monomer unit, it's because in order for you to polymerize it, these atoms have to get eliminated as you go to elongate the chain, going to the right and going to the left. So it's just the stuff that's inside of this bracket that is going to be the repeating unit in your polymer. Let's take a look at a second example of a polyester. Here we're going to identify the monomers that were used to make this polymer. polyethylene terephthalate, or PET. This is another polymer that's used in a lot of plastics. So we can first look at the structure of this molecule to identify that we have a polyester here. We see that because we see this ester functional group, and it's being repeated again and again and again. Now, we know that you make an ester by reacting a carboxylic acid and an alcohol. You eliminate a water in the process. Now, we've talked before about how you can take the structure of an ester and break it down to figure out what carboxylic acid and what alcohol were used to produce it. When we saw examples of this earlier in the chapter, we said that you can perform this retrosynthetic analysis by first breaking the ester bond. So I'm just going to break the ester bond right here, and that will allow me to separate the ester into its two constituent components. So I'm now going to draw the fragments that you're going to get after breaking the ester bond. From the left-hand side of the molecule, that's the carboxylic acid side. I recognize that because you have a CO double bond there. So we're going to have C double bonded to O, and then we have a benzene ring here. And then we have a CO double bond as well, right there. Additionally, we have, from the right-hand side of the molecule, that must be the alcohol side of the molecule then, we have oxygen, and then a CH2, and then another CH2, and then another oxygen. And then it goes on to whatever. Okay, so now we've broken it down into the fragments, and the next thing that we have to do is regenerate the original functional groups. We have to regenerate the carboxylic acid and alcohol functional groups. And that's done by remembering that in the process of making an ester, water gets eliminated. So if you break up an ester, you have to add the water back in. We have to add in 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. We'll add an OH group to the carboxylic acid functional group, and we add an H to the oxygen to regenerate alcohol functional group there. And that represents the water that gets re-added, just like that. Now, we're still not totally complete yet, because I'll remind you that you also have to eliminate more water molecules as you elongate the polymer chain here. And so if we're breaking the monomer down, we need to also talk about breaking this bond here and re-adding water into the structures for our original monomer units. And so you have to add one more water here by regenerating this carboxylic acid functional group and that alcohol functional group. So this represents another water molecule that gets re-added right here. So we had to re-add water twice. You have to do it here to break up the two components of the monomer unit, and you also had to re-add the water when you break the monomer unit from a neighboring monomer unit. Just like how, if we go back to the last slide, we had to eliminate 2 waters in order to make the polymer, right? We eliminated this one. This was the interior one that was inside of the monomer unit, but then we also eliminated another water in order to elongate the chain. Similarly, when you break up a polymer, you have to re-add water twice, right? You have to re-add water to make up for the fact that you are no longer linking it to other monomer units, right? So that's this water that's being re-added. And then you also have to re-add the interior water molecule that allows you to break up the monomer unit into the 2 pieces that formed it, right? The carboxylic acid and the alcohol. I think it is helpful to revisit this example and practice with it again, because as I mentioned previously in our last video, you'll be expected to be able to predict the structure of a polymer given what the monomers are. But you'll also need to be able to look at a polymer's structure and figure out what monomer was used in order to make it. And so this allows you to see both ways that a question could be asked. We'll now take a look at a second example of a condensation polymer when we talk about polyamides. These are made by reacting an amine with a carboxylic acid. These are going to have a lot of important applications in biology. But we're going to first take a look at this reaction that's going to form a polyamide called nylon. So here we have an amine. This is a primary amine here, and it's going to react with a carboxylic acid. Similarly to the case of making a polyester, you're going to react these functional groups with one another and eliminate a water. So we'll draw a box around the H from the amine group, and the box will also be drawn around the OH group from the carboxylic acid. This represents the water that gets eliminated when these 2 molecules get combined together, and it forms this molecule right here, right? So all we're doing now is we're just linking the nitrogen atom here to this carbon atom. And in doing so, you make what's called an amide. We call this functional group here an amide, or we can call this bond an amide bond. Another name that's used for this is a peptide bond, and if you've taken bio classes before, you may have heard that term before, and that's why I say this is a really important reaction in biology and in biochemistry. Now, if you take a look at this monomer unit, what you see is that here on the right-hand side, you still have a carboxylic acid, and here on the left-hand side, you see that there still is an amine, and so this unit can react with other neighboring units, right, repeating the process through additional condensation reactions to elongate the chain, and that makes your polymer. And so when you perform these subsequent condensation reactions, you have to eliminate more water molecules. And so to represent that, we're going to say that you're going to eliminate the water by taking away this OH group from the carboxylic acid and then this hydrogen atom from the amine. That's the water that gets eliminated when you go to elongate the chain going to the left and to the right. And that's why they're not shown in the structure of the polymer that's here. And again, this polymer is nylon. So this is a molecule that has a lot of really important applications in the textile industry. All right, we're going to wrap up this section with one more example that I want you to work on here. I'm giving you the structure of a polymer here, and I want you to determine what monomers were used to produce it. And here are the options, and take a moment to think about this. This is not necessarily a condensation polymer. This could also be an addition polymer. So this is a review question that encompasses the entire section on polymers here. On the other side of the question, we'll go over what the answer is. All right, let's talk about the answer here. So the idea is to first maybe determine what type of a polymer you're dealing with, right? Is it an addition polymer or is it a condensation polymer? Now, when we talked about condensation polymers, those contained esters or amides. And so, you have carboxylic acid and alcohol and amine functional groups that were used in making those. And in the process, right, you're going to see oxygen atoms and nitrogen atoms in the structure of the polymer. When we take a look at the backbone of what this polymer structure is, and what I mean by backbone is to look along this line that goes straight across the whole don't look at all these atoms that are going up off the backbone. Just look at these atoms that are right along the main line of the polymer. That is what is known as the backbone. We see only carbon atoms here. No oxygens, no nitrogens, and so we do not have a polyester, we don't have a polyamide going on here. This is going to not be a condensation polymer, therefore. This is an addition polymer. If you only see carbon atoms running along the backbone, right? And again, don't look at the stuff that's above and below the main line. Just look at the main line here. How are all the monomers linked, right? They're all linked by carbon-carbon bonds. And so this is going to be an addition polymer. Being able to identify that this is an addition polymer is really helpful because it's going to allow us to break the polymer down into what monomer was used in order to make it. First and foremost, I'll mention that, as discussed previously, addition polymers are homopolymers, meaning that they're only made up of one monomer unit. And so that eliminates answer choice A. Right? That would be a copolymer if you had two different things that were used to make the polymer there. I'll also point out that in the case of an addition polymer, you are making that by breaking a pi bond so that you can extend the polymer chain. And therefore, the monomer has to have had a pi bond in it. And so that allows us to eliminate answer choice D as well. Now let's talk about how we'll be able to identify what the correct answer is. The main idea here is that you need to find the smallest repeating unit that you have in the polymer. And there are a lot of ways that you can draw the smallest repeating unit, just like when we talked about unit cells. I'll just come in here and draw a circle around a monomer unit, around a smallest repeating unit in the polymer. But again, there are a lot of ways that you can identify the monomer here. But we can see that this is a one version of the smallest repeating unit because this gets repeated again right here, and then it gets repeated again here with another CH2 that then goes to a neighboring CH3CH3, right? So that would be our smallest repeating unit in our polymer. And now we'll go ahead and draw that down here. So when we extract the smallest repeating unit, we get this. So now we've extracted out what the monomer unit is here. And the last thing for us to do is to remember that when you make an addition polymer, that's done by breaking a pi bond. So when you break up an addition polymer, you have to re-add the pi bond. We're going to re-add a second bond between these two carbons. And that's important for us to do because right now when we extracted out this monomer unit, This carbon atom only has 1, 2, 3 bonds to it, right? It doesn't have an octet. The same is true for this carbon atom, right? It also only has 1, 2, 3 bonds. And so it needs a fourth bond, and so we'll just draw in a second bond. We reform the pi bond. That is our monomer unit here. And if you were to represent this in the condensed structural format, you would say you have a CH2 group, it's double bonded to a carbon, and that carbon is attached to 2 CH3 groups. So that's what the condensed structural format of that is. And that is answer choice B here. So that is what our monomer unit is. That brings us to the end of the section that deals with polymers. So take a look back and get practice with all these examples again, and get practice with some of the book problems as well. It is really important to be able to predict the products of a polymerization. It's also important to be able to break up a polymer into the monomer units. And I'll remind you that when you're doing that, one of the first steps is to be able to identify if you're working with an addition or a condensation polymer. For an addition polymer, when you look along the backbone, you only see carbon-carbon bonds. And in the case of condensation polymers, when you look along this backbone here, we see other atoms, right? You see nitrogen atoms along the way, right? In the case of a polyester, when you look along the backbone here, right, what do you see? You see an oxygen atom that's part of the backbone, right? And so that's how you can identify that here you're dealing with a condensation type polymer and not an addition polymer. Up next, we'll talk about some more applications of polymerization when we discuss natural polymers and talk about biochemistry.